solar energy. To make that a reality, we need...
We are back at the PowerUp Live Podcast Stage, presented by KeyBank Capital Markets in participation with Suncast Media. Thanks as well to our supporting sponsors, Fluence and SMA, and the myriad of other sponsors you'll see here throughout the show, who are both on the stage, on our walls, and the commercials in the back. We can't do any of this without those folks, and we also can't really do it without you all, our listeners, our attendees. I know I would be foolish to think that any of you showed up to hear me speak today, but I am grateful that we have an audience to see Mr. Jigar Shah, the director of the Loan Programs Office at the DOE. Jigar, it's always great to have you on the stage.
It's so great to see you, and I love the vintage suit.
Hey, man. Every Wednesday of the show, it's my granddad's leisure suit. It's actual vintage 70s suit.
Wow.
Yeah. I usually, you know what, true story, I wore this suit as just as a gag to dress as a leprechaun because most people never see me, right? Podcasts aren't visual for the most part. I mean, now they are.
Well, then you were hiding in Mexico for like 2 years.
And then I was hiding in Mexico. But the gag was I would show up at all these Halloween parties dressed as a leprechaun to make fun of the fact that I'm 5'4", and everyone thinks I'm 6'5".
I think you're 6'5". You're 6'5" in my book.
I love it, Jigar. Well, you know, I'm going to pull a little from the liners that were written for your Master Speaker series because I think it was really well said and well placed about the conversation that we want to have today. But if you came because you were provoked by the title, that was intentional. You, according to Jigar, are no longer in the solar industry. You see, the solar industry is undergoing a massive paradigm shift. Many working in the industry are frankly unaware that the very business model assumptions they've been working with have shifted in a massive, massive way. The DOE's Jigar Shah, to my right, maintains that if you thought you were in the solar industry, well, you are wrong. And it's much more bigger than that. Is that right? Much more bigger than that? All right. I heard you say that even if the company has sun in the name, it's safe to say they've already moved beyond a solar-only offering. What are we talking about?
Well, I think, as you know, we started this whole journey with, you know, in the modern times here with net metering, right? Mm-hmm. Where, you know, people basically said, I'm paying 14 cents a kilowatt hour for my power. Every kilowatt hour I get from solar saves me 14 cents. Yep. Even if I produce too much, I just put it into the grid and my meter runs backwards, right? Today, you know, that conversation is very different, right? I mean, it started with, well, we're going to move you to a time of use tariff, right? And then if you generate power during this time, you make more money. If you generate this time, it's less money. Then people started saying, well, you know what? Like we got, you know, power, public safety shutoffs. We have other stuff. I want a battery. I want to make sure I have backup power because otherwise when I lose power, my solar doesn't work, right? So then they started really talking about resiliency. And then, you know, folks said, well, hey, wait a second, that resiliency actually could provide value to the grid. Yeah. So you've had all these pilot programs in California, now in Puerto Rico, other places where folks are saying, we'll pay you $2 a kilowatt hour for the power out of your power wall to go into the grid. I mean, hell, in Texas, during this latest heat dome, I think they were paying $5 a kilowatt hour for that power to go into the grid, right? So now the question becomes, where is that on the spreadsheet? Yeah. Right? And how are you explaining this to customers? Yeah. And you can't call it solar because it's not really solar. Yeah, it's arbitrage. Right? What it really is, you know, figuring out how you actually treat your home system as a microgrid. Yeah. And then how you actually sell services into the system like a natural gas peaker plant. Right? Provocative. And so when you think about all the different ways you can get paid for this, we outlined 7 in the VPP liftoff report that we launched yesterday. And you know, so you're in this place where the question is, whose job is it to explain this complicated topic to the customer and to actually implement this complicated system to the customer? I would suggest it's the old solar industry, now rebranded the VPP industry. Yeah.
You know, one of the questions that I get when I was saying to folks that we're going to be talking about this topic is, that's great, but what does Jigar have to do with this? Like, Jigar's a spokesperson for the industry, but the Loan Programs Office funds companies like Tesla and, you know, hydrogen, big hydrogen projects and salt cavern storage. How does this integrate into the Loan Program Office pathway?
Yeah, good question. So when you look at the $3 billion deal we did with Hestia Sonova, right? So clearly there's a standard offering, right? Which is basically, here's the financing, you're going to pay, $65 a month. And then, we're providing a guarantee to that, right?
Yeah.
But what we just discussed is there's all these other revenue streams coming in, right? So now you got revenue streams coming in from providing, VPP services to the grid. You've got revenue streams coming in from customers saying, I really want backup power.
Right.
I want to be able to integrate my F-150 Lightning into my house and get vehicle to home. And so now the question becomes, when you go to the bank and you say, it's not just this one line item of payments every month, there's all these other line items, the bank is just going to ignore it. They're going to say, well, I don't believe in this stuff. I don't even know this stuff.
Right.
And so the question becomes, where do you go when you're in the opening innings of the game here to get respect for all the other services you're providing? It's a loan programs office.
Yeah.
Right? So we're now fielding about $12 billion of additional loans that have applications that have come in above the $3 billion conditional commitment we provided with Hestia. And we've got another roughly $30 billion worth of loans that are being actively prepared by people who've come to us, shown us early drafts, et cetera. And they run the gamut, right? So they're not just solar plus storage microgrids, but they're also folks who are running EV fleets. And they're running the EV chargers as a virtual power plant, right? And so you can come at this from lots of different ways, but there's no way to roll this out unless you actually can raise debt, right? And right now, we're the first place to do these quote-unquote weird business models and weird technologies. And then, after we get done with doing it, you can imagine a bunch of commercial banks being jealous, looking over our shoulder, going, hey, we'll do the next one.
Yeah, and nothing new for you, having had a lot of experience leading the path, leading the charge for commercial banks who were tepid. They didn't want to put their toe in the water. So it sounds like it effectively creates this sort of credit easing process by backstopping the loan and ensuring the banks that the DOE, through the loan program office, is going to step in and support any deficit in the loan, or is it an actual capital allocation to Hestia and Sunnova? How does that?
It's definitely an actual capital allocation. In Hestia's case, they actually were able to get capital from other sources, so we're providing a guarantee.
Right.
But for a lot of our other applications, we're going to provide the loan directly in, right?
Yeah.
But I do want to maybe make one more point here, which is that, so there's the respect part on the industry and the business models and the technology that, frankly, is being shown everywhere in this trade floor. But the other piece of it is getting the electric utilities excited about partnering with the solar industry again, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So there's been this 10-year sort of Cold War with the electric utility industries over net metering, and part of what we're saying is the utilities, after 20 years of flat load, they're actually experiencing load growth again.
Right.
And when you think about how long it takes to build a utility-scale solar farm with, being in the transmission queue for 4 years and then finally getting integrated, they're saying if we want to add 300 gigawatts of, new generation capacity right away, the fastest way to do that is rooftop solar.
Yeah.
Right? And so now the question becomes, how do you partner? What Lon Huber said yesterday on stage with me is that they're only going to be enthusiastic about solar if there's dispatchability with that solar.
Yeah.
Right? They're not going to do it if it's just solar 1.0. They want to see the solar microgrids get installed and for them to be able to meet the need that they have, which is 6 in the morning in the wintertime. Right? And so my sense is that we need to open up more markets for the solar industry, right? Sorry, the VPP industry. So now, when you're opening up more markets, North Carolina is a big one, right? It's been doing utility scale solar for a very long time, but frankly, rooftop solar has really languished there, right? So now the question becomes, couldn't we actually bury the hatchet with the utilities and open up these really big new markets so that we can actually get on track to, 20% of rooftops with solar on them?
Let's get down to brass tacks in terms of what it requires in the field. So it's one thing to say, hey, you are no longer in the solar industry. It's quite another for a Southern Energy Management to integrate the concept that they're having to help homeowners understand how they are becoming an integral part of the stability of our future grid, and that they can trust Duke with those assets in certain specific situations. What does the installer in North Carolina or North Dakota have to start thinking about integrating into their business model, their education programs, et cetera, to really embrace this concept that you're no longer a solar company?
Yeah, so I mean, we started this process almost 2.5 years ago. And when we started the process, I think people thought we were crazy. But we started with the big service companies, right? Whether it's the Sunruns, SunPowers, the Sunnovas, et cetera. And when you look at those companies, they have already announced publicly to their shareholders that they're VPP companies.
Yeah.
Right? This is not something that I'm making up.
Yeah, Sunnova chief
right?
among them, yeah.
They actually went to their quarterly conference call and told everybody that they're doing that. Now, Sunrun has decided to do that by partnering with Lunar Energy. SunPower has a partnership with GM Energy to help service the GM Silverado deployment. You've got Sunnova with their partnerships. Good Leap. Others are all doing that stuff. So the first thing was to figure out hey, is this something that you think is actually good for your business that's going to actually resonate with your investors, your shareholders, all that stuff, right? It turns out that it does. I think it makes the market for these companies bigger.
Yeah.
Right. So now they don't want to limit themselves just to solar.
Yeah.
They want to dominate batteries. They want to dominate EV charging. They want to dominate smart panels, right?
Yeah.
They want to be the vehicle. They want to be the channel by which all of these technologies enter the home.
Yeah.
Right? And they're all exhibiting here at RE Plus, as you know, right? So now the question becomes, you have an extraordinary business. You're an installer, right? And you have two things. You have a body of work that speaks for itself, right? So you've got thousands of happy customers that, frankly, you're probably doing maintenance on those systems, right? They call you up when something goes wrong, et cetera.
I hope you are.
And that gives you an opportunity to cross-sell them more services, right? So you're saying, hey, by the way, are you thinking about an electric vehicle? If you are, actually, the inverter that we have in there doesn't support these smart technologies, but your inverter is 9 years old now. We need to probably upgrade it anyway. When you upgrade it, you should upgrade it to this inverter, and that actually allows you to control your EV charger, control all these other pieces, and do all these things together, right? And so these are the last mile conversations that are being had, and they're being led by those installers. The only way for them to do that is to come to RE Plus and actually go to one of these technical sessions and get trained on how to do that, right? And so this is not simple stuff, right? But if you get that training, now you can actually cross-sell your existing customers. But also these new customers are coming in who just bought, or have a deposit on a Chevy Silverado, right? And they're coming in and saying, hey, I got a deposit coming in. I heard about this vehicle to home thing. I'd like to figure out how much it's going to cost to get that thing set up. And they call you up. You're like, wait, what are you talking about? Why are you calling me? Right. No, you're saying, that's great. Actually, we got training on this, at the last RE Plus show. We'd love to figure this out with you. We'd also like to put solar on your roof because that's the cheapest way to charge your car. We'd like to do this other stuff. And so my sense is that the thousands of installers and service providers that we have in this industry is the best channel to actually get a lot of these other products into the marketplace. And, they got to get ready, right? This is not a short process. It takes a little time.
Yeah, I concur. There is, there's something to be said for, as much as PG&E could be vilified, one of the things that they did really well in the time that we were starting to build the solar industry again back in the aughts and early teens was this Pacific Energy Center. It's a great example of how a utility, in steps by force, can educate the marketplace on how to be progressive in technology. It'd be great to see Duke and other utilities start to adopt this Pacific Energy Center model because they took on the education in California specifically. Thousands of installers were trained by the SoCal Edison, and what was it in San Diego? There was a similar initiative, I think, across all the IOUs in California. Would love to see that. Is that the kind of thing that that Lon pointed to, that the utilities are ready to provide? Because that does seem like an olive branch from the utilities to the service industry.
So I think we're in the early days of having that conversation. So, we clearly have a training infrastructure today. And my sense is that the electric utility companies may not have actually had this point of view 2 years ago, but I think they've made a huge shift, right? I think now that they're having to interconnect megawatts of new load every week with EV chargers, things, they're going like, well, crap, I actually need a solution this week. Not like 3 years from now, not 5 years from now, I need a solution this week. And so maybe I should be nicer to this industry who actually can provide this solution this week, right? And so they've actually made a pivot. And so I think we need to make a pivot on this side too from the industry and say, look, this is not the fights we were having 2, 3, 5 years ago, but like they actually are asking us for our help, right? And now this is an opportunity for the installers to say to the utilities, look, if you really want us to bury the hatchet and you want us to work together as a team, here's some of the things that we'd like from you. And the training could be part of it. Some of the customer education could be part of it. And so, I don't know that I'm going to be here to prescribe for you exactly how this is going to roll out. But I think we started this conversation with the VPP liftoff report that we published yesterday, right? And so that, I think, has 60 pages of extraordinary content in it to level set everybody in the entire industry, from regulators to utilities to installers, et cetera. So everyone's talking off the same set of facts, right? And now the next step, and we're featuring that conversation at our Deploy 23 conference in a couple weeks. And so now they're going to come back to us and say, all right, well, thanks for the report, but here are the 43 more things we need you to do at DOE. And we're happy to learn about all those things, some of which we're going to say, stop telling us to do the stuff you're supposed to be doing. And then some of the stuff we're going to say, that's a good idea, right? And we have 25 programs that DOE already does that, some of those ideas might fit within that, some of which we may not be able to do in the State Public Service Commission or the utility has to do. And so that is the next conversation, right, is to figure out how do we do this in a way that is logical and brings everybody along, but also creates standards and, make sure that everybody's doing it the same way.
I was tracking, you guys, you released the virtual power plant commercial liftoff document, which I would encourage everyone to go download. It talks through the 7 points of...
Download it twice.
Download it, at least 3 times, please, so the marketing team gets credit. But you had an incredible, I can't find a better phrase for this, but tweet storm, even though it's X, like there's not an X storm, I don't think yet. So if you're not following Jigar on formerly Twitter, then you should be. But you had this incredible thread, and I'm going to read something from it that was a question that I had in the back of my mind. It's like you were reading my mind. We've had demand response, and I'll add DERs. We've had interoperability of different products with the grid and friendliness with utilities on those services for decades. This is not new technology. And it does feel a little bit like the service providers are feeling like they're getting caught unaware and they're on their heels, and we want to try to help them move forward. But my question really is, what's different now than 10, 15 years ago when we were starting to build our solar careers and businesses?
Yeah, so I think, as you suggest, DOE has been funding pilots in the space for 30 years, right? Not just through the solar office, but also the building technologies office, right, to make smart buildings, and also the vehicle technologies office for V2X, and all these other things, right? And so now the question really becomes like, how do we unlock these 7 value streams, right? Because in the programs from 10 to 15 years ago, the vast majority of these programs were focused only on emergency situations, right? So if the grid hit like, a real point where they needed to pull out all the stops, then they would say, hey, we're going to pay you to provide these services. If there was a public safety shutoff, if there was one of these other things, then they would say, great, we're going to count on you to help us get through this trying time. What we're saying now, though, is that these services are so robust, and we're putting in cybersecurity and all these other pieces into all this, that you can dispatch them every day. Right. You don't need to dispatch that natural gas peaker plant that's in the middle of a residential neighborhood, but instead you can actually dispatch people's batteries and pay them what you were going to pay the natural gas peaker plant. Because those peaker plants are only running less than 9% of the year, their average cost per megawatt hour is over $300 a megawatt hour. Right? Because you pay them a capacity payment to keep them operational, and then you pay them a small kilowatt hour payment when they operate, right? But overall, they'll run so few hours, you pay them a lot of money. Right. I was like, why don't you pay this household that money to provide that service? They have all this equipment in there, and if they're not using it that day, and you don't actually have to drain their battery to do it. You can drain their battery like 10% to do it, as long as a lot of people. Exactly, as long as a lot of people participate. And so the question really becomes like, in a time when energy burdens are going up for consumers, right? This is a place where you can easily take money that you're putting into, assets that frankly are, polluting the environment, are costly, right? And have justice issues. And you can shift that money to homeowners who actually want to participate in helping their neighbor.
Yeah.
Right? And so you should pay them to help their neighbor to provide these same services, and they'll be able to help their neighbor even more as vehicles, come online, electric vehicles, right? Because, when you think about a Tesla Powerwall or some of the other batteries, these are like 10, 12, 15 kilowatt hours, right? I mean, your F-150 Lightning is 125 kilowatt hours.
Yeah.
That's a large battery. You can run that house for a week.
I'm glad you mentioned, you dropped in there a token word, and it's a key word that has not found its way into the dialogue before, let's call it 18 months ago, and that's justice. As we sought, 15,
I wouldn't
20,
use the word token. That seems like the wrong word to use for justice, my friend.
That's fair. It's fair. I was trying to think of the right word, but the word justice wasn't something that we were integrating into our sales process or our loan establishment process 15, 20 years ago when we were trying to just get homeowners to adopt solar.
That's right.
And it was their common refrain was, solar is for the rich, storage is for the rich. So one of the key milestones that I see in the LPO backing of the Hestia deal with Sunnova is improving their ability to allow more homeowners to participate in what effectively is transactive energy. It is the ability to be engaged in this process at a neighborhood level, not without the disparate nature that it has been before. Can you talk a bit, as a final note, about the intention behind the financing to these kinds of deals and what we want to see at the neighborhood level?
Yeah. Let's not be introducing transactive energy. That feels scary. This is all VPPs, my friend. I think when you think about where this industry has gone, right? So it started obviously with people who had cash in their checking account and was just paying cash for solar projects. We are now at a point where I think when you look at the data coming out of the national laboratories, where they process every quarter the average incomes from the folks in the solar industry that are going solar, that number is down to like $60,000, $70,000 household incomes, right? So it's far more affordable and far more broad-reaching today than it was 5-10 years ago. But I think that part of what we say in the VPP Liftoff report is that we now have to be intentional. Yeah. Right? There are certain neighborhoods that the solar industry, frankly, has not been advertising in. That's right. So now the VPP industry's got to make up for that mess. I think when you think about the services that many of these communities need, they need resiliency, they need reliability, they need all these services that we're talking about, and we frankly have the ability to provide them these services. These communities pay, right? It's, as Barbara Einrich, who passed away last year, right, the author of Nickel and Dime, said that it's expensive to be poor. Yeah. Right. So for a lot of these folks, they actually pay a much higher cost for basic services than other people do, right? And they just do it in their own way, right? So we now have to be intentional about bringing these services. I'll give you some examples. So, we buy, as Americans, $10 billion of appliances a month. Yeah. Right? So water heaters, refrigerators, HVAC systems, right? And, those appliances generally are a no-brainer, right? When something breaks, they always break. You generally don't proactively get a new one. Ken Moore. So basically, it's always an emergency, and for LMI customers, where that's roughly 40% of the market, they're putting it on a credit card if they've got capacity there, or they're doing something else, and they're often paying 30% interest for that. Right? That's ridiculous. No one's giving them free appliances, so they're paying for that, right? So now the question becomes, can we figure out ways to give them much lower cost financing, right? And so what Lon Huber talked about yesterday was he has a new financing program that's on the meter, right, that can do it that way, and that reduces the interest rates into the single digits. PG&E and some of the California utilities have done this for some time as well. You've got utility on-bill financing programs in New York. You've got a lot of these places where they've had, frankly, this latent ability to do this, but haven't actually leaned into doing it. So now we got to lean into doing it. Some of these programs have been in place for 5 years and no one actually used them. We got to figure out how to make sure that we use them. And then once you're there and you're helping them with the water heater that just broke or the HVAC system that broke, or whatever else, you can start to educate people on solar plus storage and electric vehicles and all these other things. Remember, the other thing that the Inflation Reduction Act has is a tax credit for used electric vehicles. Yeah. Right? So there's a $4,000 tax credit there, and there's an increasingly growing number of used electric vehicles available too. So you can now get into electric vehicles more affordably. Everyone, have been taking Lyft around here. Now, a lot of my Lyft drivers are running electric vehicles because
Yeah.
they're saying actually the cost per mile is a lot cheaper, and so we're making more money that way. So I just think that we all have to be intentional about making sure that these solutions are being offered to these other communities because they actually have money to spend on these things, and they are spending money on these services, but they're often spending it suboptimally. They're spending it on the most expensive way to get these services because we're not going in and saying, actually, I went to the RE Plus show this year, and here's some of the things I learned about, and here's some of the great innovations that we can give to you. And these populations like cool stuff as much as everybody else does. Like the notion that they need like 30-year-old technology is ridiculous.
Yeah.
They have smartphones. They want to be able to control their thermostat from their smartphone. They want all these things. So I just think we got to be intentional about it.
Yeah.
And I think with that intentionality, we're going to double the size of our market.
If you would like to learn more about the virtual power plant commercial liftoff, I would encourage you to go to liftoff.energy.gov/VPP. That's liftoff.energy.gov/VPP. Please go download it, as we said, 3, 4, or 5 times. Send it to your friends. Tell everybody, you are no longer in the solar industry. Really think about this. The job that we have inherited is to expand the service offering in not only our industry, but to reach out and create the kinds of partnerships that we see with Ford and Chevy, that we see with Duke and the utilities, that we see with Swell and electrical installers. The industry is changing. We have been, so far, leaning in. We are the ones who have challenged homeowners to think differently about how they integrate their services in their home. Who else should be standing in the gap to provide these additional gadgets, these additional services? And what we have, it sounds, from this conversation, is a commitment from stalwarts like Duke to bring services to the table to help educate the industry and to integrate plans in their pricing offering that encourage and enable homeowners to take action.
Well, I think the one thing I'd say is that's different today is that these utilities are experiencing pain, right? So we're not selling vitamin pills, we're selling pain medication, right? And, the utilities are far more interested in jumping on that. So, in general, I think the dynamic has shifted. They really need these services. The last thing I'd say is that, when we've got about $41 billion worth of interest already that for applications received and or applications we know are being actively prepared. But I think that, when we're all said and done, we're probably going to commit $100 billion out of the Loan Programs Office for this sector. So I think we're going to do our part to make sure that $100 billion is invested well on behalf of taxpayers, which means good standards, working with the regulators, working with our friends at the Electric Power Research Institute to make sure all these technologies are meeting all the relevant standards and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of work to do, but frankly, there's no better industry to do it with.
You heard it here. Who's going to tweet that? We're not selling vitamins, we're selling pain medicine. You're not in the solar industry, you're in the virtual power plant industry. Jigar Shah, the director of the Loan Programs Office, thank you for taking time to join us today.
My pleasure.
And thank you all for joining us here at the PowerUp Live Podcast Stage, presented by KeyBank Capital Markets. We'll be back in just a few moments with our next session. Please stick around.